Today we will look at American workers in the 19th century through the struggle between labor and management in an age of rapid industrialization. We will consider individuals like Samuel Gompers and Eugene Debs, organizations like the American Federation of Labor and the International Ladies Garment Workers Union, and look at violent strikes like the one that took place in Homestead, Pennsylvania in 1892. It's American labor. We will see many labor unions emerge in the 19th century because of the poor working conditions that we addressed in our last unit. Low wages, long hours, unsafe work conditions. Unions exist to get better working conditions for its members. And during the Gilded Age, it was difficult to unionize because workers oftentimes switched jobs frequently. Maybe the factory down the street had better pay, had shorter hours, or maybe it was safer to work there. Also, the flow of immigrants looking for jobs made it difficult to unionize because they made it easier for employers to get rid of those who were not satisfied with their jobs. You were easily replaced. In order to change their working conditions, unions used strikes where they would walk off the job, ceasing production in factories, slowdowns where they would produce less goods. Remember that less production equals less profit for the owners. And some tried getting support in Washington from the people who were supposedly elected to represent them in Congress. Also, they tried using the courts. But the government overwhelmingly supported business during the Gilded Age. In order to break unions, employers brought in replacement workers who were not members of the union. To the striking members, these individuals were known as scabs. Remember that there were a lot of people looking for work during the period of industrialization, lots of immigrants coming into the country, so these workers were easily replaced. Employers would also lock out their workers until a better deal was reached. How long could a person go in 1877 without work? Eventually, the employer would get what they wanted. They would also circulate blacklists, which basically had a list of employees who corporations should not hire. These would be employees who were members of the union, people who had been critical of management. And so once you're on that list, it became very difficult to find a new job. Employers would also make their employees sign yellow dog contracts, which said that they would not join a union while employed at their factory. The Knights of Labor was the largest labor union during the 1880s. Founded by Uriah Stevens in 1869, it was one of the most important labor unions during the Gilded Age. Under the leadership of Terence Powderly, the Knights of Labor had nearly 700,000 members at its peak. It started out as a secret organization that was open to both skilled and unskilled workers. And again, it was open to all workers except for lawyers, bankers, liquor dealers, and professional gamblers. The Knights of Labor sought to solve issues through collective bargaining, which is where the two sides would sit down and discuss the issue and try to hammer out a deal. If you watch professional sports, you'll hear CBA tossed around all the time, meaning collective bargaining agreement. It's an agreement between the players and the owners, which this has been the source of labor disputes in all North American sports over the years. The Knights of Labor declined in popularity as a result of the struggles between labor and management in the late 1880s that became increasingly violent through strikes. The American Federation of Labor was another of the most important labor unions during the Gilded Age. Founded by Samuel Gompers in 1881, the AFL was a combination of several separate skilled craft unions. It did not allow for women and unskilled workers to join, who made up 90% of the American workforce in 1881. Like the Knights of Labor, the AFL sought agreements through collective bargaining with management, but were much more likely to support workers going on strike. By 1900, the AFL could boast 500,000 members, and the AFL still exists today as part of the AFL-CIO, which is the biggest collection of labor unions in the United States. The American Railway Union was founded by socialist Eugene Debs. It was one of the first industrial unions as it was only for railroad workers. It was also the largest labor union in the 1890s. After the failed Pullman strike in 1894, which we will consider shortly, the American Railway Union became part of Social Democracy of America, a socialist political party led by Eugene Debs. Debs would run for president 4 times. In 1920, he ran from a prison cell and got 3.5% of the vote. The International Ladies Garment Workers Union was founded by 16-year-old Pauline Myers, who by the time she reached her 16th year had worked in sweatshops for half her life. One of the first unions for women, The International Ladies Garment Workers Union gained members following the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire in 1911. The factory, which occupied the 8th, 9th, and 10th floors of a building in New York City, employed mostly immigrant women for about $7 to $12 a week. When the building caught on fire, many women were unable to escape the blaze because at the time, owners and managers locked the doors to stairwells and exits to prevent employee theft. 146 women between the ages of 14 and 43 would die from the fire or from attempting to jump from the building. Nets held by waiting firefighters broke under the pressure as people jumped from the 9th floor. The union grew in number after this disaster, as did calls for improved worker safety. The first major strike in American history was the Great Railroad Strike of 1877. Workers on the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, some of you might know this as the B&O Railroad from Monopoly, went on strike when owners cut their wages by 10%. The strike impacted railroads in 11 states, and riots broke out in Pennsylvania, Maryland, West Virginia, and Illinois. President Hayes was forced to call out federal troops. At the end, more than 100 people died, and there was more than $5 million in property damages. And for workers, they went back to work at even lower wages. At a rally at Haymarket Square in Chicago, workers were organizing to call for a shorter workday. The 8-hour workday was a popular rally cry for workers at the time. While police were preparing to break up the rally, a bomb went off, killing 7 officers. The police responded by firing on the crowd, killing 4 civilians and wounding many more. 8 anarchists were arrested and charged with very little evidence, and 4 were hung. For labor, the Haymarket affair made the public view labor unions as radical and violent and run by anarchists. When Andrew Carnegie and plant manager Henry Frick decided to cut worker wages by 20%, one of the most violent strikes in American history broke out at Carnegie's plant in Homestead, Pennsylvania. Workers who went on strike were locked out, and Frick brought in new workers to break the strike, along with Pinkerton guards who were used to keep locked-out workers away from the plant. There was also a barbed wire fence around the plant, as well as guard towers with snipers. A battle ensued between the Pinkerton guards and steel workers when Frick tried to bring in these new employees. Eventually, the governor of Pennsylvania sent 8,000 National Guard troops to Homestead to restore order and protect the strikebreakers. 4 months after it began, the Homestead Strike ended, 16 people died, and the union was broken. An assassination attempt on Henry Frick turned the public even further away from unions, feeding the belief after Haymarket that labor unions were violent and run by anarchists. Steelworkers in the United States would not be able to effectively organize again until the New Deal in the 1930s. When the Pullman Palace Car Company cut worker pay by 25%, workers, with the assistance of Eugene Debs and the American Railway Union, went on strike. The United States government used the court system to try and stop the strike. The injunction from the court said that strikers had to go back to work because the strike was interrupting U.S. mail service. Debs and many other leaders went to jail for refusing to obey the court order. The Supreme Court said that governments could use injunctions against strikers. By 1900, we can see the impact of government support of big business, as only 3% of American workers were part of a union. And let's close the show by looking at the impact of the rise of labor unions in a time of rapid industrialization. The strikes I just discussed bore little fruit for workers in the 19th century, but there would be changes in the 20th century during the Progressive Era and the New Deal. Workers would eventually get paid more, work shorter days, and see much safer working conditions than those they experienced during the Gilded Age. Some would even be able to let their kids spend their days in school rather than factories. You all should be happy for that. We will look at race relations next time when we meet Jim Crow, and until then, good night, Albuquerque.